Hello and welcome to the Sunday Gardener. It's the 1st of October and we've passed the autumn equinox. It's very mild today, but it's only a short time before we will begin to get the colder weather and some frosts, and already the garden is starting to slow down. We're going to look at keeping dahlias over winter, and before we did that I wanted to show the dahlias because it's very late in the season. This is October and they are still full of flowers, and there are still lots of flower buds on them, still flowers to come. They are very long-lasting dahlias. These have been in flower for several months now and have produced a tremendous amount of flower. This is called Purple Gem, and they're beautiful flowers. This is a single colour flower with multiple flowers on it. Dahlias come in all shapes and sizes and a wide range of colour, and they flower for a long time. They're great value in the garden. And although the dahlia tubers are not expensive, it's better if we can overwinter them and keep them from year to year. And how you overwinter them will depend on where in the country you are gardening. These dahlias have been grown in a container because this is rented accommodation without a garden, and I want to take them with me when we move. But dahlias grow very well in the ground as well, and the trick is how to keep them over winter, and that's what we're going to look at next. We're looking at dahlias, and in particular how to overwinter dahlias. A lot of people have put off growing dahlias because of the difficulties of overwintering them, and I'm going to tell you about a really easy way to overwinter dahlias to encourage you to grow them, because they are a beautiful summer flowering plant. And this one is just about to come into flower. It's a little bit late because we've had such a poor spring and summer, but shortly it'll be a mass of colour. The problem with dahlias is that they are not hardy and they really dislike winter wet. So if you're gardening in an area with heavy soil and a lot of winter wet and you leave them in the ground, they'll just rot and they won't come back the following year. So the traditional gardening advice is to dig them up at the end of the season, cut all the top foliage off, hang them up somewhere to dry, dust off all the soil, dry them, and then put them in bone dry compost or sand over the winter, and hope when you go and check on them in March that the tubers are viable. Now what I found, particularly in the area where I was gardening before, the Pennines, which is very wet, that because there's so much water in the atmosphere that even if you dry them out as much as you can and you pack them into dry compost, they still don't survive the winter. The much easier thing to do is to, as they are here, have them in a container. And at the end of the growing season, when the frost comes and all this top growth will go black with the frost, cut it right back and leave the tubers in the container over the winter. Cover the container with a mulch and put the container somewhere sheltered where it won't get a lot of rain. It's important that the container doesn't get saturated over the winter. So mulch it, put it somewhere sheltered. That might be under a bush, it could be under the eaves of the house in the rain shadow. And then when it comes to the spring, to March, and you want the bulbs to start growing again, dig out gently all the top layers of compost down to the tubers, and then refill it with new compost to give it nourishment, because dahlias are hungry feeders and they will need to be fed during the season as well. Don't throw the old compost away. It's really useful for growing new spring bulbs in. Spring bulb is a complete item in itself. It doesn't need new compost, so don't throw the compost away. You can also use it as a mulch on the garden. So fill it full of new fresh compost and put it somewhere sunny. Water it if it's dry, and in 2 or 3 months' time it will look like this. Now I hear you say, but I don't want to grow my dahlias in a container, I want to grow them in the border. Well, there's also an easy trick to deal with that. So here is another dahlia which you can see is in a container, but a different type of container. You can use a larger one as long as you use a plant pot type container and not a stone or ceramic container. And the reason for that is what you can do is dig a hole this big in your border and as deep to about there on the pot, so just the rim is showing. Sink the dahlia in the hole, cover it up, and then you can, for all intensive purposes, looks like you're growing your dahlia in the border. But the advantage is that come the end of the season, you don't have to dig it up. You lift the whole pot out of the border, cut the foliage back and do as you did before. Cover it with mulch, put it somewhere sheltered for the winter. And I've seen this in quite a number of stately home type gardens where they have very big herbaceous borders, and I'm given to having a good look around and ferret in the borders and see how they're tying things up. And I've often noticed the dahlias, particularly in the northern gardens where it does tend to be very wet and you can get a lot of problems with winter wet, I've noticed them in containers with just the rim showing, and they're growing them in containers and then lifting them at the end of the season. So you can either keep them in the pot or you can put them in a plastic type flower pot container and sink it in the border and grow them in the borders. And this is a much easier way to overwinter dahlias, and I hope encourages you to grow them because they are beautiful, showy summer flowering plants.